Hello and welcome to the QFTest video tutorial about testing web UIs with QFTest. This video is about chapter 14, using the debugger, from the written tutorial. As already mentioned in the first part of this video tutorial, I would like to point out that the video tutorial deals with testing web UIs. We use testing web UIs in place of all supported UI technologies like Java and Windows, because the concepts and usage of QFTests are more or less the same. You can find explicit hints about the marginal differences in the written form of the tutorial. Debugging stands for step-by-step execution of individual actions of a test case in order to analyze the execution behavior of a test case, or to increase the understanding of the test case or the tested application. In this video, we will talk about setting breakpoints to pause the test run, about stepping through sequences or test steps step by step. We will skip the execution of nodes. Then we will discuss how errors and exceptions could trigger the debugging functionality just in time. We will use the run log to analyze errors during the test run. And finally, we will pause the execution on demand. We will use the provided demo test suite First Web Test QFT from the tutorial folder in the QFTest installation again. Please save it to a folder which you are allowed to write to, like the desktop or documents folder. Perhaps you could recall the first video of this tutorial. In the second test case, second with error, there was an error regarding the price check. In this chapter, we want to learn how the test case works and what's causing that error. And we will also see how to analyze and how to fix it. If we want to walk through the test case step by step, we need to start the debugging mode first. There are lots of ways to do that. The simplest way might be to set a breakpoint, which automatically causes QFTest to pause its execution and activates the debugging mode once the breakpoint has been reached. You can set a breakpoint by opening the context menu and selecting the action breakpoint on/off or Ctrl F8 on the keyboard. A breakpoint is visualized as a yellow square containing a black bee inside. You can set as many breakpoints as you want, and breakpoints can also be removed via the context menu again. Again, you just need to choose breakpoint on/off or Ctrl F8 on the keyboard. So I have set the breakpoint to the first test case. Let's run the test set to see what's happening. The application started and QFTest is in the pause mode. That's what we see here in the activated pause button. On the right, we see the debugging functions of QFTest being enabled now. And we also see the pausing execution in the right bottom corner in the status line where we read the text paused. In front of the test case first, we also see a little arrow telling us that QFTest is about to execute that node as next node. The test run has been paused here because the test run reached the breakpoint which we have recently set. And now we are ready to walk through the test case step by step in order to see how the test case works and to analyze the behavior of the application. But how could we start a step-by-step execution now? Therefore, we can take a look at the first debugging button, the single step button. If we press this once, QFTest jumps from the test case to the test step. So the little arrow is directly in front of the test step now. So the single step button confirms one step in QFTest. So whenever you press it, one execution step is being performed. If I pressed it once again, QFTest would jump to the mouse click, and if I pressed it once again, QFTest will perform that mouse click and will jump to the next mouse click. And so I can really walk through the test suite step by step by pressing the single step button. If a test step is about to be executed next, like the reset now, and you don't want to confirm every action of it individually, but you want to run the whole test step, then you can use the second green button, the so-called step over button. If you press this guy, QFTest performs the entire test step or sequence or test case which has been marked, and it executes the steps including its children. After the execution, QFTest pauses the execution again at the next sibling node. like the select model I5 test step in my case. You see the arrow is now directly in front of the test step select model I5. And so you can run every sequence or every test step using the step over button. The third green button, step out, executes all test steps or sequence nodes at the same level as the current marked node. So in my case, if I press it once, QFTest will perform all remaining test steps because they were all at the same level, and it will pause the execution at the next parent level, which is the cleanup node. In the previous videos, we have already talked about the cleanup step and its special behavior to the execution, especially that it will be performed after every test case once it's placed inside a test set. And if we want to see what the cleanup node is actually doing and how it works, we can now debug through the cleanup node using the single step button, for instance. Pressing single step jumps from the cleanup to the stop client node. If we press single step again, QFTest performs the stop client action, which will actually close the browser in a few seconds. And then the wait for process to terminate node is the next node to be executed, and pressing single step again will then execute that particular node. The next node to be executed is the setup node again, because it's located in the test set, and there is a second test case which will be executed now. And if we are not interested in the content but in the result of the setup, we can use the second green button step over to run the entire setup. The browser was opened and the second test case is being marked with the arrow again, and QFTest is in the pause mode, and now we are able to proceed debugging with the second test case. Now we can again jump into it using single step and go ahead using single step or step over, and so on and so on. By the way, if I press on the pause mode now, so we can call it releasing the pause, QFTest will continue the test run till it reaches the next breakpoint or till the end of the test run. In our case, it will reach the end of the test run because we have no further breakpoint set. So we have seen how the green arrows in the toolbar works. But what about the red ones? The red arrows do fairly the same as the green ones, but they are just skipping steps instead of executing them. This means if we have the reset test step to be executed as we have it now, and if we press the first red arrow button called skip over, the test step will be skipped. It won't be executed. But the test step select model I5 is the next step to be executed. And now I can decide whether I would like to skip it as well, or whether we would like to jump into it to take a closer look at the test step. The button skip out, which is the second red arrow, simply skips all the test steps and all the nodes at the same level as the test step select model I5 in my case. So this means if I press this guy, all test steps will be skipped and QFTest waits again at the cleanup node. And I can just run the cleanup now via releasing the break, because we are at the end of our test run. The skipping buttons in the toolbar are very comfortable if you want to perform manual steps in your application during debugging. Then you can simply skip unnecessary steps from your test case and just focus on the steps which need to be executed. And those were the base functionalities of debugging with QFTest. Let me give you an advice from real life, especially with regards to single-step execution. If you want to debug menu actions with submenus or selection steps in pop-up lists like combo boxes, it could happen that the click at single steps take the mouse focus from the operating system away from your application to QFTest. And so it could happen that those lists or menus get closed because you have pressed the single step button in QFTest. In order to avoid that, you should use the step over button to debug the whole selection action in one step. Alternatively, you can also set a breakpoint at the first action after the selection and let QFTest run till it reaches the breakpoint. And if you want to remove the breakpoint, you can do that via the context menu, breakpoint on off, or you can also trigger the command clear all breakpoints from the menu. QFTest activated the debugging mode as it reached the breakpoint. There is one more way to get the debugger started automatically in case of errors or exceptions. Just a refresher, errors are incidents if dedicated checks fail, like a wrong value is popping up in the application, and exceptions are incidents if the test run can't proceed as expected. For example, you would like to click a button which is not there anymore. In order to activate the debugger so that it gets automatically activated once such an error or exception occurs, you can open the debugging menu, and there you need enable the debugger via clicking the enable debugger menu entry. So you need to have the check there. And then you have the debugging options, which is the last entry of that menu, and there you can select break on uncaught exception and break on error. If the checks are missing, please click at them to check them once. And as a consequence of that setting, QFTest will interrupt the execution whenever an error is popping up now. And that's exactly what I want, because I would like to understand the error of the second test case, which is still there. So please ensure that the debugger is enabled and that break on uncaught exception and break on error is checked. If so, let's go ahead and let's run the test set. And here we are. An error dialog popped up, so QFTest worked as expected. As the error occurred, so the error during the check text, QFTest went to the pause mode and we have the error message here. And here we see the error message, which means that we have expected $29,000, but we got $26,100. If the error is really obvious to you and you directly recognize what's wrong, for instance, a typo in your text, then you can confirm the dialog and simply update the check text now. If the error isn't obvious at the first glance, we can jump to the QFTest run log via using the jump to run log button. And that's what I'm doing now. So I press jump to run log and QFTest opens the run log at the location where the error occurs. So in my case, we have the error message being selected, which is part of the check text, which is part of the test step, check final price. And there we see the message again. We see the screenshots. Then we can take a look at the application. We see any previously executed step, like the mouse clicks, the input of the discount, and so on. And so we can analyze the test flow, what really happened. So perhaps we see that mouse clicks were missing or that a wrong value has been entered directly before. But even if that test execution was fine and okay, so everything seems to be selected correctly in my case. So the right vehicle has been selected, the proper discount has been granted. And so we have to take a look what could be wrong on the screenshot. And there we see it's really a mistake in our check, because 29,000 minus 10% is actually 26,100. So we need to adapt the check. And how to do that? Therefore, you can click at the error message and open the context menu. And there you find two interesting entries in that menu. The second entry, Find Node in Test Suite, will jump to the test suite once you click it, and it will directly select the check text node. And then you can modify the check text node manually. In our case, we have a failing check text, and we have the expected value 29,000 directly specified inside the check. And because of this, we can also update the check node directly with the current data, which is actually the first menu entry. So if I press this, QFTest selects the check text and it automatically updates the text with the value from the application. Now I can close the run log, and if I press pause again in order to continue the test run, QFTest will go ahead and it will proceed with the test run. At the end of the execution, the error dialog pops up again, which is okay because during the execution an error happened, which was the error opening the debugging mode, which we fixed afterwards. So that's okay. As we have fixed our test case, let me rename the test case and let's get rid of the with error text here, so that we just call it second. And so we used the run log to analyze an error and even use triggering commands to update the test suite accordingly. depending on the data coming from the application. And so we can trigger the debugger via breakpoints or via enabling the debugger menu together with the settings on breaking on uncaught errors or exceptions. And there is even a third way to start the debugger, and that's simply pressing the pause button during recording. So let me just start the test set once, and in a couple of seconds I will press pause in order to interrupt the test run. So now I press pause, and QFTest is in pause mode, of course. The debugging functionality has been activated, and we see that the select node, so the selection of the specials model, is the next node to be executed. That's what we see because of the little arrow here. So using the toolbar button to pause the execution is also pretty comfortable, just to interrupt the execution at a certain point of time. If you cannot hit the pause button during your test run because of the screen resolution or because your application doesn't allow you to switch to a different application, you can also use the keyboard action Alt F12, which stands for the so-called no panic key in QFTest. That no panic key can be configured to another setting in the options of QFTest. And so we have seen the most important actions of the debugger and 3 ways to start it. But there is even a 4th way, which is simply press single step once no test run has been started. So now in my case, the test run has been stopped. I select the test case first, and if I press single step, the debugging mode has been activated and the little arrow stands in front of the reset. And so we can go ahead and debug our test case if we want. So which other features are worth to mention about QFTest debugging? We could talk about the last button in the QFTest toolbar, so that green dot surrounded by the black circle, which is called Locate Current Node. This button supports you in finding the current node again, especially if you have selected lots of other nodes in your test suite because you were reading it, you were analyzing it, perhaps you did some changes there. And if you got lost and don't know what's the current node actually, where is the little arrow? You can click that button and QFTest directly jumps to it. And so you are back at the current node, and then you can go ahead releasing the break or proceed with debugging, whatever you want to do. Then there is one more button, which is gray at the moment, which is a yellow lightning button. And this button stands for rethrowing an exception. An exception is something which interrupts the execution of the test run once it occurs. For instance, the test case should click on a button which is not there anymore. In that case, the test case is being interrupted and an exception is being generated. If you have the debugger enabled with break on uncaught exception activated, QFTest could open a debugging mode and showing that exception to you. If you would like to see what will happen during a test run if you don't deal with that exception or if you don't solve that issue, you can simply press that lightning button and test the stability of your cleanup nodes and the stability of your post-condition nodes, because they should be able to deal with such an uncommon situation. In other videos on that channel, we will also discuss means how to get our test execution quite robust with respect to unexpected behavior. And then there is even a context menu, which I need to show to you. And this context menu entry is only available if you are in the debugging mode. So if the test run has been paused. And that's the menu entry, continue execution from here. So at the moment you see the test case, which is interrupted at the test step reset. Let's say you want to do the reset manually or you don't want to execute it at all. You can also select the test step, select specials model chess, for instance. Then we open the context menu and then we select continue execution from here. If we do so, the black arrow moves to the test step, select specials model chess. And now that test step is the current one to be executed, and we can decide whether to execute it via single step or via step over and so on. So we can skip certain nodes using the continue execution from here command. or we could repeat them. So if we want to see the reset action once again, we could now select the reset again and say continue execution from here. And then the black arrow is again at the test step reset, and we can repeat the reset. So you see that I'm able to jump to any node in my test case during debugging using that context menu action. And there is even one more feature which makes QFTest debugging quite exciting, and that's the variables area, which has been opened besides the terminal area in the right bottom corner. And the variables area is only being opened once the debugging mode is active again. And there you see all the current variable bindings, so all the variable values of your test cases. This area, as well as variables, will be discussed in another video on this channel. And finally, we reach the end of chapter 14 using the debugger. We set a breakpoint to pause the test run on demand. We tried the toolbar buttons to analyze a test case step by step to get a better understanding what was going on. So we used single out, step over and step out buttons. We were able to skip actions using the step out button, for instance. We were able to skip actions using skip out and skip over toolbar buttons. We learned how to open the debugger automatically if an error or an exception occurs via selecting the menu item to enable the debugger. We opened a OneLog to understand what was going on, and finally we were able to resolve the error by useful commands from the context menu of the OneLog. And there were commands to navigate to the spot of the error in the test suite, and another one to update a check node directly. Finally, we interrupted the test run on demand using the pause button or the keyboard shortcut Alt F12, which is the no panic key of QFTest. Debugging in QFTest is very powerful and offers lots of comfortable features to make test case analyzation very simple for you. Take some time to try the shown concepts here step by step.